Great. Welcome, everyone. Again, I said my name is Peter Transberg, although it looks like I'm speaking as Amalia Burgos. In fact, I am Peter Transberg, and I'm happy to be the moderator of this webinar this afternoon. This webinar was developed in response to interest from the education cluster and in support of broader efforts to promote youth-responsive programming in education in crisis context. We're really thrilled to have three experts with us today, each of whom will share some of their work with us and help lead the discussion that we have planned at the end. We're first for each of the three presentations and open up the floor for questions and input. So please ask questions until the end of all three presentations, or you can feel free to type your question, as I mentioned earlier, in the chat box at any time, and then we'll ask the presenters to answer it later during the discussion section. So without further ado, I will pass the microphone to our first presenter, Mr. Josh Chaffin. Josh is a Senior Program Officer for Livelihoods and Child Protection at the Women's Refugee Commission. Before coming to the Women's Refugee Commission, Josh served as Technical Expert Adolescents at UNICEF Regional Office in Nairobi and at UNICEF Headquarters. He has consulted child protection and youth empowerment issues for various UN agencies and NGOs, and he serves as editor of 2 national poverty reduction strategy papers. In 2006 to 2007, he managed USAID reintegration program for children and women affected by the fighting forces in Liberia. Sorry with me for a second. I'm going to close the poll actually before I can actually pass the presentation.
Everyone hear me? All right. I guess I can't hear anyone else. I'll just assume. My name is Josh Chaffin. Thanks a lot, Peter, for the introduction. I want to talk about a literature review that we did looking at hundreds of pieces of literature around the issue very generally of education in emergencies for youth. So start with this photo just to kind of keep things in perspective. This is in Liberia, West Africa, 2006, I believe this photo was taken, and it's a picture of a young man who is studying by a street light because he doesn't have lights in his home. He lives on the beach just about a block from here in an informal settlement, and I just want to point out that you'll see a lot of kids in a context like this, post-conflict context. Things are in Liberia right now, but you'll see at that time you saw many kids at night this, and it just shows their determined to study, their their determination to study, that they out at late at night doing their work. And I want to actually keep in mind the fact that you didn't see, there's no girls in this photo. It's not really appropriate or safe for girls to be out on the street doing what this kid does. They don't even have that opportunity. So just to kind of keep this kid in mind, and the girls aren't in this photo as we go through this presentation today. Like we did a big literature review. I'm not going to claim that it's comprehensive, but we did what we could with the team that we had, and some of the key findings are that agencies that work on education in emergencies for youth need to think differently than they would if they were working in the West. Important that these agencies think about facilitating the transition to work. So kids in emergencies in low-income countries don't really have the luxury of attending school for the sake of attending school. They really need a product of, or the chance for a near-term economic benefit from their participation. Some of the key principles that are needed in trying to do youth education in emergencies program are participation. So kids need to be participating in the design, in the mentoring, and the evaluation of the programs that are meant to serve them. The key principle is inclusion. It's very important that programmers make sure that they're reaching the most vulnerable, including, in the case of displacement, refugee displaced youth as well as host community youth. A couple more findings are that as a part of this goal of inclusion, we need to make sure that our approaches are girl-friendly. Not enough just to think yourself as welcoming to girls and women, but we need to take special measures to ensure that they're being reached, especially those at the margin. Our approaches need to be both formal, so formal school, and non-formal. And as you'll see, many of the kids that we're trying to serve, non-formal education is the only access to education that they may have. We need to focus our education on transferable skills. If you're talking about a displacement setting in like a refugee camp or an urban displacement setting, we need to ensure that the skills that young people are getting are going to be transferable in case they end up getting resettlement to a third country or going back to where they came from. We need to ensure that the skills they get are going to be useful to them, not only where they are, but where they're going to be in the future. And there's two more points on as we go to figure out what works in this kind of programming, we need to know, we need to have data that's disaggregated by sex and age so we know exactly who it's working and not working for. And we need longer-term studies. We've been, it's a review of the research, pragmatic evaluations and case studies that we looked through. We're defining youth as 15 to 24 by the UN definition. Many countries, of course, define youth in different ways. We needed a blunt measurement of youth, so we're using the UN definition. The limitations of our study include, as option a couple times, there's hardly any rigorous research on youth education and emergencies. And when I talk about evidence, I am using that term colloquially. There is no what we pass in an academic journal as rigorous evidence on these issues yet. Most of the studies that we look at don't disaggregate or analyze by the sex or the age of the youth. So there are, as we know, youth is a homogeneous group, and there are many, is not a homogeneous group, I'm sorry, and there are many distinctions within the youth category depending on age, depending on sex, depending on many other factors, ethnic and tribal factors in some places. A limitation in our process is that the only reports we look at are those that are in English, and I'm sure that there's a wealth of information out there in other languages. The categories we looked at, again, very blunt categories. We have three. We looked at secondary and tertiary education first. We looked at TVET second, meaning technical and vocational education and training. And so livelihoods training, some people call income generating activities. And third, we create a blunt category of life skills, peace education, and recreational activities. I should at this point that my co-author is Breazeale, and wanted to just have her out there. She did most of the research and a lot of the writing on this process. Secondary education, in this category we found that tertiary education is the most neglected category, perhaps not surprisingly. Basic education gets the bulk of the funding and emphasis in emergency settings, which may be understandable, but this has adverse effects on the whole system, namely because the lack of higher education incentives or even secondary education leaves the motivation for students and families to send their kids even to primary school. So the fact that you have secondary education or high school or tertiary education means that fewer people are willing to enter basic education. Some of the challenges and gaps in this area, and you'll see this in all the categories I'm going to talk about, but gender equity is a huge problem. We are reaching parity in developing country settings, so non-emergency settings. We're reaching parity, getting to the Millennium Development Goal of education parity in some countries at the primary level. Outside of that, there are massive inequities, especially in emergencies, especially in the post-primary levels. Vulnerable groups are rarely adequately included. There's just a general, a regular dearth of policies and guidelines for youth education in emergencies, and it's probably related to the fact that donors are reluctant to invest in this area of work because there's so little evidence. So this size was a start. We're trying to get to at least to understand what evidence does exist. There isn't much, but we tried to collect it here. Promising practices that we point out, and there's in the report that you can look at. I'm sure we'll be sending a link. Our distance education programs, so that people, it's difficult to achieve economies of scale and make it economical for older youth, especially, to get access to education programs because there's so little demand. So this education helps to bridge that gap. And it's also quite important for many agencies have had success with trying to ensure that the offerings that they deliver are accredited, and their exams are accredited not only in the place where a displaced youth, for example, might be settled, but in the country where they came from and in the third country that they might arrive in upon the resettlement. In the second category, the TVET category, universally reports complain about TVET curricula being outdated or irrelevant. So, got carpentry curricula from 1978, and kids are just not interested. Families are not interested in sending someone to get a certificate in a study that they don't feel like they have any relevance to their economic life. In general, this whole category of work, TVET, and livelihoods training historically has not reached girls. It was a giant World Bank compendium of economic strengthening programs for youth in 2006, I believe, that found that only 15% of such programs even make the effort to reach girls. And I'm sure those numbers are better now with the big push for adolescent girl approaches. But even if it's doubled, that's only 30%. Some of the challenges and gaps in this area have included that this is a big one, and it's a cultural one. It's something that governments really need to work on with their populace, but that non-academic training, so TED or learning job skills, are somehow seen as substandard to regular education. It's like they don't think people, families, children, and governments themselves don't feel like this is real school. It's not the real thing, and so reluctant to get involved in it. Problem two with TVET and livelihoods training is that labor are so weak that even if you do go through this kind of training, often you'll get out and there won't be any work for you. And that's one big way to get over that issue is to put young people through, engage young people in a process to do surveys, a participatory market survey, to figure out what demand is for goods and services in the area, in their local area. It's not only is it makes sense to figure out where the demand is and to connect them to better chances for income growth, but it's also a way to inject some participation into and to honor their participation rights. Again, across all the areas that we look at, programs need to focus a lot more on impact than just output. So if at the outset of any program, be it formal or non-formal, be it life skills program or chalk and talk classroom setting, we really be thinking more about the impact of our program, in the sense that how well does this connect young people with a way to grow their income. If we start with that question, and I think that better outputs will get better impacts in the end. The practices that came out of the lit review, like I mentioned, market analysis and identifying beneficiary needs, especially in a participatory way, is absolutely essential to getting good outcomes. Everyone that we had pretty much mentioned that we need to take a holistic approach. So even if you're just a kid in carpentry like this kid, that's not enough. He's going to need access to perhaps childcare. What if he's taking care of his young siblings in his home? He's going to need life skills training. He's going to need soft skills training. He's going to need information about his health. He's going to need access to reproductive health information. And it's the package that gives you better successful outcomes. And of course, and in everything in the humanitarian development enterprise, building on locally supported local structures and make sure that you're getting local ownership from the outset is going to give you a lot better outcomes than coming with a the box approach. So in this third category of life skills, peace education, and recreational activities, some definitions. Life skills includes a package of interpersonal skills, decision-making skills, critical thinking skills, self-management, time management type skills that many employers, for example, complain that even if a kid has perfect skills in pipe fitting, they may not have these other skills that really make the difference between success and failure in life. Peace education, as the name suggests, includes it talks more about relationships between individuals, between communities. It's them to think about their behaviors and the behaviors of the people around them, and helps to shore up the structures that promote peace and prevent conflict and help to resolve conflict. Relational activities are especially important after a shock because it's a form of psychosocial rehabilitation, helps to restore independent functioning in the community, and it's also attached to the ever more important, as of donors, priority of disaster risk reduction. Again, this kind of non-formal education may be the only access that young people have to education, and so we need to take these approaches very seriously and fund them. And some of the challenges and gaps, and again, this goes to all areas we looked at, but in general, youth, as we all know, work the youth theme, are seen as victims or threats by their governments, by their communities, and in spite of that, the reality is that in many of these countries, the demographic youth bulge is the biggest, the most valuable natural resource that these countries have, and it needs to be tapped. I'm going to quickly jump through the rest of this because I'm running out of time, but just to kind of recap some of these key findings and expand a little bit, we in education and emergencies field really need to think differently than we do about education in our home countries in the West. Facilitating the transition to work is a huge priority for families, for learners themselves, and not possible for them in many cases to attend school just for the sake of attending school. We need to look at not only the formal school system, but the non-formal education offerings that we can bring in, that we can engage communities to develop. Again, non-formal education may be the only access to education that a kid will have in rural Pakistan, in an earthquake, in many of these other emergencies that we've seen in recent years. We need to focus on transfer skills that make sense not only after a flood in the Philippines, in a rural island, skill that's going to make sense in a resettlement situation. So, I mean, the examples that come up all the time are training in UN languages, so English, French, Spanish, etc. Computer skills always needed. Two big principles that we harp on in this paper are participation and inclusion. This comes up over and over in the literature, that engaging young people to participate in the design, the monitoring, and evaluation of their programs, and engaging their parents, if their parents are around, and communities themselves in designing and owning these programs at the local level is absolutely essential to, not only essential to the success of the program, but so it helps to honor their participation rights and their right to be heard. Inclusion and making your programs girl-friendly is absolutely essential to reaching that 52% of the population. In many cases, that is female. Without both gender mainstreaming and gender targeting in your program, it's a recipe for failure. And finally, just a sort of monitoring evaluation note, but one that is absolutely essential, and it's one for donors to be demanding from programmers. That is the need for age and sex disaggregated data. So not only do we know, how many youth are involved in this program and and how many are succeeding and how many are failing, but which youth exactly. And so we can adjust it's the 13 to 15-year-olds that aren't succeeding. Now, why is that? Because I don't know, because they have some certain household duty that they've got to do, and it's getting in the way of their participation in our program. We know information like that if we hope to see. And finally, everyone complains in the literature that they wish they had the money, the experience of longer-term studies, so we can really tell what's working and what's not working. And I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening.
Thanks a lot, Josh. That was great. Taking too much of a pause, I'll pass it now on to our next presenter, which is Brooke Breazeale. Brooke has been working with INEE over the past 3 years. Her background is in conflict resolution with a focus on conflict transformation through education policy and programming to adolescents and youth. She with INEE as part of the coordinating team for the Working Group on Education and Fragility, and now serves as an advisor for the Adolescents and Youth Task Team. I'm currently working with the task team to develop a training module on adolescents and youth programming in emergencies, which is exactly what she will be discussing today. So, Brooke, over to you.
Hello to you all, and thanks again for joining us today. I mentioned I am currently working with the Adolescents and Youth Task Team, which I'll be referring to as AYTT during the presentation, to develop a team on adolescents and youth programming in emergency contexts. Progress has been made in recent years to ensure that all children and youth affected by crisis have access to education opportunities. There remains a need to ensure that the specific issues of adolescents and youth are in education and emergency policy and programming. As you know, INEE has developed a training package which provides training materials to guide those working in the field of education and emergency. AYT and other key stakeholders working with youth issues wanted to develop a module addressing the specific needs of young people so that those working in the field have access to the proper tools and guidance needed to address those issues and needs. The training module was designed for wide application to be used by education clusters, INGOs, UN agencies, ministries of education, and other education emergency stakeholders. The training consists of a 90-minute PowerPoint presentation, has a facilitator guide, and supplementary exercises relating to education programming and youth issues in emergency contexts. The Facilitator's Guide offers detailed step-by-step guidance on how to conduct the training, and the supplementary activities provide participants with opportunities to begin actually putting some recommendations into practice. So been compiling an extensive list of recommended resources to offer practical tools for implementing good practices and promoting youth participation. The module was developed through a consultative process involving the AYTT co-conveners and wider AYTT membership, in addition to other key stakeholders working with adolescent and youth issues. So the overarching objectives of the module are to first identify challenges and vulnerabilities specific to adolescents and youth in crisis situations, as the ways in which young people can make valuable contributions to their families, schools, and communities. objective is to review good practices and specific recommendations for effective quality programming for adolescents and youth. And third objective is to learn practical ways to promote meaningful participation for adolescents and youth. The training module offers a range of different views that inform recommended approaches for youth programming. It also focuses on practical ways in which create opportunities for young people to engage as active participants in all stages of programming. The module will be incorporated into the harmonized training package in the coming weeks, and it is hoped that the module will be utilized to strengthen the knowledge, evidence base, and capacity of education practitioners and key stakeholders in the field of education and emergencies, while also providing a forum where challenges can be discussed and good practices shared. So that's the brief view of the module. Thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to receiving any suggestions, comments, or questions you might have regarding the training module. And I also provided some links here so you can access any of the modules in the training package and also obtain more information about AYTT. I thank you again. I'm going to pass this back over to Peter.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Brooke. And I'm sure and I hope that some of the participants will have some questions or inputs even during the discussion later on in this webinar. Before we get to that section, I'm going to pass it now on to our third and final presenter for the day, which is Dr. Maria Nieves Alvarez. Dr. Alvarez is program manager of the Breazeale sector project called Realizing Children and Youth Rights. 15 years of experience in development cooperation and has worked in the past for GIZ in Latin America and for UNICEF in Haiti. She holds a doctoral degree in educational science. Dr. Alvarez will be presenting in French without translation. I did notice that her slides are in English, and you can feel free to ask questions later on in English, and we'll make sure that they're translated for her. Although I know she understands English and would just prefer to speak to us in French or Spanish. So, welcome and thank you very much, Dr. Alvarez.
Bonsoir et merci pour l'invitation. Sont très intéressantes les présentations que nous avons écoutées et finalement je vais présenter quelle est l'expérience du GT7 pour offrir la participation des gens dans des emergencies, des urgences. Offrir la possibilité de participation des gens, ça signifie que les gens sont des agents très importants dans toutes les préventions, depuis les urgences, le développement, la reconstruction. Ils sont les principaux moteurs pour le processus de réforme sociale, économique au niveau local ou régional ou national. Ils sont les experts de leur groupe de propre vie pour sortir de la situation et commencer à dans le premier pas d'améliorer leur situation. La participation des jeunes d'une coopération intersectorielle et interdisciplinaire différentes approches du travail. Si vous connaissez bien le travail du GI7 dans les dernières décades, le développement des capacités, c'est une des principaux niveaux d'intervention dans tous les secteurs. Et pour nous, le développement des capacités pour promouvoir les participations des jeunes, c'est un symbole d'intervention de différents acteurs, c'est policy framework, des organisations, des networks et des personnes, mais au centre de toutes ces interventions se prend en compte des vulnérabilités de la résilience. La vulnérabilité, c'est compris comme la vulnérabilité sociale, c'est-à-dire la fragilité matérielle, morale à laquelle est exposée la personne, l'organisation et une société. Et la résilience, c'est la capacité de l'individu, du collectif pour faire face aux défis. C'est pour ça que les groupes sociaux sont très importants pour renforcer la cohésion sociale. Et pour nous, c'est la focalisation des jeunes comme pas seulement comme des personnes, des individus isolés, sinon comme un collectif social qui peut prendre une rôle assez importante dans des urgences. Bon, renforcement des capacités signifie pour nous des interventions aux différents niveaux. C'est-à-dire, on prend en compte les facteurs de protection, les interventions de renforcement des compétences et interventions structurelles au niveau local, régional ou national. On dit micro, méso, macro. Mais c'est pas seulement de cette structure. Nous sommes de l'opinion qu'on devrait prendre en compte des stratégies de résilience de différentes destinations, c'est-à-dire stratégie de résilience universelle pour toute la population, que peut faire par exemple les campagnes de radio ou le développement des curricula pour une école ou pour un département. Au deuxième lieu, sont du développement de stratégies sélectives de résilience pour des groupes de populations qui sont plus exposés au risque, c'est-à-dire de gens qui sont par exemple dans les champs de réfugiés. Et finalement, de différencier aussi les stratégies d'intervention de résilience indiquées pour identifier les personnes qui sont vraiment en situation de risque précoce et qui ont une forte probabilité de devenir plus vulnérables. Comme ça, nous avons une panorame trois-dimensionnel. On voit les protections, le développement des compétences et aussi des interventions structurelles aux trois niveaux, macro, méso ou micro ou local. Et le troisième niveau, c'est de prendre en compte les différentes stratégies pour les différents groupes de jeunes qui sont en différentes situations. Si on peut donner quelques exemples, dans toute cette séance, nous avons vu que toutes les interventions qui ont fait, on a quelques impacts, on a besoin du temps, le time factor in English. C'est très important. Parce que par exemple, je peux voir comme les petites interventions qu'on a fait avec les groupes de gens au niveau local ou régional, ils ont évolué et finalement les pays, El Salvador, l'Amérique centrale, a une politique une politique nationale des jeunes. C'est simple à dire, mais finalement, ça a pris presque 10 ans de temps de la conformation des premiers ateliers, des groupes de travail, à des participations actives des jeunes pour commencer à identifier quelles sont la vision et les secteurs qui voulaient conformer activement. Ça fait à côté de la petite institutionnalisation du travail des jeunes dans les institutions à niveau local, avec l'inclusion de différentes institutions. naturellement pour l'intégration dans l'élaboration du différents plans d'urgence au niveau communautaire, mais la participation seulement du secteur de l'éducation ou seulement focalisée dans l'éducation, sinon d'ouvrir la participation des jeunes qui sont dans le secteur. Nous avons vu que effectivement l'alliance entre jeunes qui deviennent plus actifs dans le secteur, par exemple, de santé, de prévenir toutes les thématiques de santé, c'était très important pour faire un bon travail au niveau de l'école, mais des alliances entre les secteurs de santé et le secteur scolaire. C'est une bonne commence de voir comment on peut ouvrir les possibilités agrandir le secteur, par exemple, avec la participation des jeunes pour les problèmes de travail, de faire la qualification, de travailler avec le secteur privé, parce que les jeunes du pays sont bien stigmatisés pour tous les problèmes de la violence des jeunes qu'il y a dans la région. Nous avons la santé, le système scolaire, le système économique d'ouvrir au secteur privé. Et aussi de voir quelles sont les différentes activités qu'on peut faire, pas seulement pour les jeunes en général, mais en différenciant les jeunes et les femmes, also les hommes et les femmes dans les différentes groupes de tâches, non? Pour les plus jeunes et pour les plus grandes, comment se peut dire. Enfin, on a travaillé avec la coordination des donateurs et aussi avec toutes les participations actives des institutions publiques ou privées et au bas niveau d'intervention. C'est-à-dire, votre framework dans Salvador, c'est aujourd'hui institutionnalisé, mais c'est un processus qui a pris beaucoup de temps et qui permet d'offrir la participation très très active des gens. Autre exemple des organisations, j'avais dit que c'est de prendre en compte les différentes organisations qui travaillent dans les différents secteurs. Pour la protection, il y a d'autres organisations qui pour le développement de compétences ou pour les interventions au niveau structurel et dans les différents niveaux d'intention. C'est de travailler ensemble et ensemble, pas seulement avec tous les acteurs, sinon de faire la gestion d'apprendre ensemble, d'améliorer la coordination et de voir de n'être isolés. Nous avons par exemple en Salvador eu l'opportunité de travailler avec ECLAC à Chili. C'est la Commission des Nations Unies pour le développement économique à l'Amérique latine. Et le travail de ECLAC a permis que l'ECLAC a pu faire une recommandation de politique dans tous les pays des Amériques latines très bien involucrés dans le travail des organisations. Ce que fait avec toute l'erreur, avec toutes les avances, avec tous les bonnes pratiques, c'est bien de faire réfléchir dans d'autres instances, dans d'autres niveaux de coordination. Bon. Au niveau des personnes, c'est clair, c'est important, la qualification et la formation des compétences des acteurs. Intéressant pour nous de voir qu'il y a des expériences, par exemple, à l'Afrique du Sud, où les gens agi comme médiateur de conflits dans les communautés en coopération avec la police et l'administration locale. Non, c'est un exemple d'intervention des gens très, très concrètes qui n'a pas une... Comme avec l'expérience en El Salvador, et aussi pas de comparaison avec l'expérience en Pakistan. Par exemple, il y a une alliance des jeunes pour l'organisation qui s'occupe des personnes touchées pour les catastrophes nationales ou l'instabilité politique. Pour nous, c'est important de voir que chaque expérience a le contexte culturel, social déterminé et qu'on peut partager les expériences, mais la pluralité d'expériences et des interventions qui sont très importantes pour nous. En conclusion, bon, l'renforcement des facteurs de protection, de résilience à différents niveaux, au niveau local, de district national ou régional, c'est important comme la promotion pour soutenir le développement des capacités pour les partenaires locaux et les différentes institutions, d'améliorer les services des institutions à tous les niveaux, la formulation et la mise en œuvre de politiques. Je pense que le dialogue intersectoriel entre les donateurs et avec les donateurs est une très bonne base de travail. Renforcer ce que a dit aussi de l'importance de prendre des activités en relation des jeunes, pour les jeunes filles, et aussi de l'adaptation aux groupes et plus vulnérables. Que seulement avec les réflexions critiques entre nous, c'est possible de voir quelles sont les différentes pratiques identifier les différentes activités dans un contexte concret. Il y a les jeunes, important pour baisser le cycle de puberté et d'inégalité. C'est-à-dire, on peut non seulement parler sur les jeunes, je crois discuter avec les jeunes et donner les voix pour qu'ils prennent les méasurements de leur motifs, de leur intérêt. C'est important d'accroître la possibilité des jeunes pour participer activement, d'encourager les jeunes dans les clusters d'éducation commune, premier pas que nous pouvons bien mettre en pratique. La recommandation, si nous avons eu les pratiques finalement directement de expérience dans l'éducation de cluster, c'était magnifique en Haïti, mais finalement les gens n'étaient directement involucrés dans tous les processus de planification, de orientation des activités pour la prévention des urgences. On pourra commencer avec les classes d'éducation qui ouvrent pour la participation des gens dans son travail. Participation des jeunes, c'est pas seulement de but. Je crois que partager les bonnes pratiques, de promouvoir les expériences comme aujourd'hui, c'est très important. Finalement, vous pouvez voir quelles sont les approches, les méthodes, les différentes méthodologies qu'on a fait. Je suis très heureuse de participer dans ces groupes et j'espère que nous serons en contact. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Alvarez. J'espère qu'on aura plein de questions à vous poser. Thank you to Dr. Alvarez, and thank you to each of our three presenters. We have now come to the period of our webinar where you, the participants, are free to ask some questions or to offer comments or inputs on any of the things that you've seen in part of these presentations. Certainly willing to hear from your experiences as well in terms of youth programming in emergency settings. So if we're going to take just a few questions, we'll take 2 or 3 questions first, and then we'll ask the presenters to on, and then we can take more questions after that. So if you have a question, either feel free to raise your hand by clicking on the hand below the names, the list of names, or you can feel free to put your question in the chat box, and just please type to everyone so that we can see the question and respond. So we have one hand up. So if Epifania wants to ask her question, feel free. Go ahead. We can't. At least I'm not hearing you. Epifania, maybe. I see that you have unmuted, but we're not hearing you.
So ask questions by the with that box.
Yeah. I would try to pass you the microphone, unfortunately. Let's see. If Epifania, if you want to just type the question, that's a better option. Those who want to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand or to type directly. Any with the question, while we're waiting for the typed question? All right. Well, I have a question that I'd like to pose. I'll pose as out loud to Brooke, and then we can take the other questions as they come. Brooke, I'd ask if you could give a idea about who will be using the training. Maybe you can emphasize that point again. Will there be actual trainings held by INEE or other groups, or is this something that is to be done at different levels? And also, if you could give an example maybe of one of the group activities that is involved in the training module. All right, looks like we have a question from Anna. Is the research is talked about available on the INEE website? Maybe you want to take those 2 questions, and then we'll move on to others. Josh has already answered the one question. Yes, indeed, it is available on the INEE website, and that's the link that he shared there. We'll also be sharing that with all participants when we send an email follow-up to this webinar. Brooke?
Me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So the module, as I stated before, it's designed to be used for application, for instance, by the education clusters, UCs, INGOs, Ministries of Education, and since it is to be incorporated into the comprehensive training package, you have the option of either utilizing this specific thematic focus on youth and adolescents, or you can incorporate it into the training with the additional modules available. I think that question, and you wanted to know about one of the specific exercises or activities, supplementary activities. So I think the interesting ones is the video provided, actually a video of UNHCR and the International Olympic Committee. And it's a video, but it demonstrates their approach to using sports to address gender violence, as well as trying to sort of gain gender equity in the refugee camps. And it's just a really nice, great video, and then posing to the group, which they interpreted as being some of the characteristics that we're going for. In other words, holistic, cross-sectoral, inclusive. You know, what was it, each of those things? How could it be improved? Things like that. So just open up discussion and offer them the chance to offer our own experiences and how they might have done something for nature. So that's an example. Sufficient to answer your question.
That's great. Excellent. There's another question for Josh, and maybe Josh, if you've had a chance to look at the question in the text box, would you mind giving us a head, and maybe better for the recording anyway, if you can answer verbally.
So the question is, in terms of the recommendation to facilitate the transition to work, at what level is that? And at lower levels, are the tensions between a focused transition to work and findings of neglect of tertiary and gaps in secondary, etc., discussed in the report? It's a good question. I argue that you need, if you're gonna think of education offerings as a transition to working, be it wage employment or, in this case, self-employment, then you need to work on this at all levels. And there are even evidence in, not some in our report, but there's evidence that shows that some of the kind of income growth approaches to education are much more effective at younger ages than they are at older ages, which may be a little bit counterintuitive, but they're finding that approaches like working on savings behavior and hooking up kids with savings accounts, that the earlier you can get to young people with an approach like that, the better, because, you know, by the time somebody reaches kind of late adolescence, their patterns of spending and saving behaviors are already established. But I mean, fortunately, so many, to talk about income growth or, you know, economic strengthening type approaches to education, it's really a big bucket full of dozens and dozens and dozens of different approaches, you know, including, like I mentioned, savings, including you know, soft skills like, you know, customer service and employability skills and that kind of thing. But there's an approach that's really hard to generalize about which ones to do when. But I think, to answer your question, in general, you really need to think about this all along the educational spectrum, all along the life cycle, you know, for learners.
Great, thanks, Josh. There is another question that came in through the chat. It's about whether or not, if some of the presenters can talk about experiences that they know of where there's been an effective use of social media or online programming in any of the programs that you've been in touch or you've been involved with. Docteur Alvarez, j'ai vu dans votre présentation en fait que vous avez mentionné le online. Je ne sais pas si vous avez des expériences ou des différentes voilà, différentes expériences où vous avez vu que les groupes des jeunes ont utilisé social media ou une présence online qui a aidé en fait le projet. vous avez quelque chose pareil?
Anna, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, there are examples from Haiti or Latin America. I can provide one example from Pakistan of earthquake, as well as when the Pakistani military went against the Taliban in Pakistan in 2009. There are a number of youth-led organizations like the Youth Alliance, who supported IDPs in those camps with blankets, with food, with education. What they did, they used social media to raise funds and also to meet and group together. So that's a way for them to use social media to get together and to develop a program and provide assistance to IDPs. Also, mobile phones are largely used in that setting as well.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Anna. Are there any other presenters or participants who have answers or would like to answer any of these questions? Feel free to chime in as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to add that in field research, like when we've gone to do urban assessments with displaced people, like the most recent example was Johannesburg and interviewing Somali refugee youth. It was astonishing the degree to which kids who were out of work and out of school somehow managed to be on Facebook, somehow managed to be in touch with hundreds and hundreds of kids all over the world. In spite of all these other challenges in their lives, they were very much plugged in. And I'm not saying that their experience is typical of the displaced kid in a setting, but I think there's a great deal of potential here. And I mean, I work at Women's Refugee Commission, and we have one program which is not related to education, but is related to reproductive health and emergencies, and we have created a platform that fits on Facebook that helps reproductive health professionals talk to each other and learn each other and ask each other questions about different procedures. So, I mean, there's definitely potential for this out there. I would caution, though, that young people tend to use the internet in organic ways that make sense to them, and it's really difficult for kind of outs to come in with an approach and expect for young people to grab onto it. I don't know, and also, technology is such a moving target. Like once you get something built, it's already obsolete. So I don't know. These are some of the challenges, I guess, but I'm not saying it can't be done. And as the questioner points out, there's a lot of potential for this.
And that last comment you made certainly reinforces the point to have youth participate in all programming, whereas outsiders and/or adults may not have the best ideas about how to use these media. In fact, youth they're working with would be valuable with regard to their inputs, ideas for designs and other uses. Questions? Does anyone want to ask a question aloud? You can feel free to just raise your hand and ask that. Otherwise, feel free to type. And any last comments from either our presenters or any of the participants? Well, thank you very much, obviously, to each of the three of our presenters for presentations today, and thanks for the participants for joining us and for your questions.